A millionaire faked a trip, but what he saw between the cleaner and his mother with Alzheimer's. The flight to London departs in 3 hours. I want no mistakes. Kunle Adebayo buttoned the jacket of his dark suit in front of the mirror in the grand foyer. He didn't look at his mother when he spoke, nor did he look at Emeka, the young employee in a light blue uniform, standing silently a few feet from the empty wheelchair. The estate in Ikoyi was a monument to Kunle's success. White walls, bulletproof glass, absolute silence, a sterile fortress designed to maintain control over everything, especially over the disease devouring Mama Yetunde's mind. At her age, Yetunde sat on the living room sofa, her gaze lost on an invisible spot on the wall. She wore a pale, yellow Ankara blouse, perfectly ironed. Kunle paid a fortune weekly to a team of 3 specialists, a neurologist, and a private nutritionist, to ensure his mother lived exactly like this: clean, medicated, quiet, and safe. Dr. Emeka will be here at 5 to measure her blood pressure, Kunle continued, adjusting the watch on his wrist. The diet is on the kitchen whiteboard. Bland pounded yam without salt at 1, liquid supplement at 4. If Mama becomes agitated, give her the blue pill. If she doesn't calm down, call emergency services. Understood? Emeka? Yes, Mr. Adebayo. Everything is clear, the young woman replied, lowering her gaze. Kunle didn't trust her. Emeka had been working in the house for barely a month after the previous 3 high-level nurses resigned, complaining about Yetunde's hostility. Emeka wasn't a certified nurse, just the night shift cleaner who had asked to cover extra daytime hours. Kunle accepted out of desperation, but something in the young woman's attitude deeply bothered him. She was too gentle, too familiar. Sometimes he heard her humming a gospel hymn while cleaning. In this house, there was no reason to sing. I'm leaving. I'll be back on Friday. Kunle didn't approach to say goodbye to his mother. He knew Yetunde wouldn't recognize him. For months, she had only seen him as a stranger in a suit, or worse, just another doctor. He closed the main door with a dry thud that resonated throughout the ground floor. Outside, his driver, Ade, waited with the back door of the black SUV open. To the airport, Mr. Adebayo? The driver asked. No, drive around the block, park in the service alley behind the property, and turn off the engine. Ade looked at him through the rearview mirror, confused, but nodded without asking questions. In the back seat, Kunle pulled out his phone. He opened the mansion's security camera app, black screen. He himself had deactivated them that morning. If he wanted to catch Emeka in an act of negligence, he couldn't let her see the red camera light blinking. He wanted her to feel free, unwatched, completely unpunished. He was convinced the young woman ignored the medical schedules. He had noticed small things in recent days. The blue pill intact in the pill dispenser, a cushion moved from its place, the television tuned to an old high-life music channel instead of the financial news he left on by habit. Someone was breaking the rules, altering the perfect and costly ecosystem he had designed to keep his mother alive. And Kunle Adebayo did not allow anyone to break his rules. 60 minutes passed. The silence inside the SUV parked in the alley was suffocating. Kunle checked the time, 1 p.m., the exact hour for the tasteless pounded yam. Wait here for me. Don't start the car until I tell you, Kunle ordered, opening the door stealthily. He walked towards the service door with his briefcase in hand, his leather shoes treading slowly to avoid making noise. He pulled out his master key. The lock turned with an almost imperceptible click. Kunle pushed the door and entered the laundry area. He was inside. The trap had sprung. Now he just had to walk to the living room, catch the employee sleeping on the sofa or stealing a valuable item, fire her on the spot, and prove to himself once again that money and absolute control were the only real way to care for someone. He moved down the kitchen corridor. Everything was dark. The blinds closed to protect the furniture from the sun, but something stopped him dead before reaching the threshold. Kunle lifted his head. His nostrils flared. He frowned, unable to process what his senses were telling him. In his house, the air always smelled of clinical disinfectant, ironed sheets, and the prescribed therapeutic diffusers. But now the air was thick. It smelled of hot oil, baked dough, strong spices. It smelled like poison for his mother's arteries. Kunle's pulse quickened. Anger rose up his neck like a flare. Junk food. The cleaner had brought junk food into the house. The doctors had been extremely clear. Mama Yetunde's heart was weak. Her digestive system barely tolerated liquids. Excess sodium could cause a fatal hypertensive crisis. That's why Kunle spent millions of naira a month on a dietary chef who sent insipid, gram-measured meals. And this girl in a blue uniform had brought rubbish into his crystal temple. He gripped the handle of his leather briefcase until his knuckles turned white. Firing her was no longer enough. He was going to sue her. He was going to ensure Emeka Obi never got another job in the entire city. Medical negligence was a crime, and he had the lawyers to destroy her. He continued down the main corridor connecting the kitchen to the large wooden dining room. The smell of melted cheese and pepperoni grew more intense, almost offensive amidst the minimalist decor and abstract art. Suddenly, a sound broke the mansion's sepulchral silence. Kunle froze a meter from the dining room door. He held his breath. It was a voice, but it wasn't Emeka's voice apologizing or talking on the phone. It was laughter, a clear, vibrant, deep laugh, a laugh that chilled his blood, not from fear, but from absolute disbelief. It had been exactly 5 years since his father's death and the brutal advance of Alzheimer's, that this laughter had not resonated through the walls of this house. It was his mother's laughter. Kunle took a step forward and peered through the dining room doorway, hidden in the shadows of the hallway. What he saw left him breathless, his mouth literally agape, paralyzed as if he had crashed into a concrete wall at 100 kilometers per hour. Natural light streamed in through the immense garden windows, bathing the large solid oak table in a warm, golden hue. There, at the center of the scene, was Mama Yetunde. She wasn't hunched. Her gaze wasn't vacant, nor was her face the gray, apathetic one Kunle had seen for months every morning. She sat upright in her chair with her glasses perfectly adjusted. Her yellow Ankara blouse seemed to glow. She was smiling with such pure, lucid happiness that she looked 10 years younger. Beside her, leaning over the table with protective warmth, was Emeka. The young woman wore her light blue uniform with white trim, her hair pulled back in an impeccable bun. She didn't look like an employee breaking rules. She looked like a guardian angel. On the table, there was no pounded yam, no syringes with supplements, no measuring cups. There were 2 enormous cardboard boxes. Emeka held a silver spatula. With a careful, loving movement, she was serving a gigantic slice of pepperoni pizza directly onto Yetunde's fine porcelain plate. The melted cheese stretched in perfect, steaming strings under the sunlight. "Careful, my child. It's hot," Yetunde said, laughing and rubbing her hands in anticipation, like a small child waiting for a gift. She was speaking. Yetunde, who had been babbling incomprehensible syllables for weeks, had just formed a complete sentence with meaning and emotion. "Blow on it a little, Mama," Emeka replied in a sweet voice, placing the plate in front of her. Just how Papa Sigun liked it, didn't he? With lots of cheese and crispy edges. Kunle felt a direct punch to his stomach hearing his father's name. "Exactly so," Yetunde sighed, closing her eyes for a second as the aroma enveloped her. "On Fridays, we always ordered this on Friday nights when the children were small. Kunle would eat all the pepperoni before the pizza even reached the table. Such a mischievous boy he was." The millionaire stepped back half a pace in the darkness of the hallway, feeling breathless. He dropped his briefcase. The leather object fell to the marble floor with a dull thud, but the 2 women in the dining room were so absorbed in their moment of happiness that neither noticed the sound. Kunle stood there, trapped in the doorway. He was going to burst in screaming. He was going to invoke the cardiologist's warnings. He was going to talk about sodium, cholesterol, million-naira lawsuits, and instant dismissal. But he couldn't move. In front of him was not criminal negligence. In front of him was his mother, brought back to life by a piece of dough and cheese. Remembering a past, Kunle believed Alzheimer's had erased forever. He had spent millions on medicines to keep her heart beating in a state of permanent sadness. Emeka, with a simple hidden pizza and a kind conversation, had given her back her soul. The suited businessman, the man who controlled hundreds of employees and managed 9-figure accounts, realized, in that instant, that he knew absolutely nothing about how to love his own mother. And as he watched Yetunde take the first bite and close her eyes in absolute delight, Kunle Adebayo knew that the trap he had set to destroy the cleaner had just closed around his own throat. The forgotten smile. The Italian leather briefcase lay abandoned on the marble floor. Kunle Adebayo, the man who didn't hesitate to liquidate entire companies with a single signature, the ice-cold negotiator who never showed weakness in board meetings, was completely petrified in front of the doorway of his own dining room. He couldn't take a step forward. He couldn't retreat. His brain, trained to process data, risks, and protocols, was undergoing a monumental short circuit. There was his mother, Mama Yetunde, the same woman who that very morning seemed an empty shell, a gray-haired ghost who could barely hold her gaze fixed on the wall. The same woman whom Dr. Emeka Eze, charging exorbitant fees, had diagnosed with irreversible cognitive deterioration and severe hostility. But the woman Kunle was seeing now, bathed in the golden light of the window, was not a ghost. She was alive, terribly alive. Her hands, which usually trembled holding the sterilized plastic cups with vitamin supplements, now firmly held the edge of the pizza slice. Melted cheese slightly stained her fingers, but she didn't care. She chewed with astonishing vitality, savoring each bite as if it were the most exquisite delicacy on the planet, closing her eyes with a gesture of absolute pleasure that erased 10 years of wrinkles from her face. "It's delicious, my child, delicious," Yetunde murmured with her mouth half full, letting out a little mischievous giggle that plunged an invisible stake into Kunle's chest. It had been years since he heard that laugh. Since Alzheimer's began stealing her words, memories, and dignity, Yetunde had become a perpetual patient. Kunle, in his desperation not to lose her, had turned the house into a luxury hospital. He had banished salt, sugar, fats, loud music, unexpected visitors, and anything that could alter her fragile nervous system. He had built a perfect crystal cage, and now a minimum wage cleaner had just shattered that cage with a simple greasy cardboard box. Emeka, sitting beside her, took a common paper serviette, not the sterilized, hypoallergenic towels the doctors demanded, and gently wiped the corner of the elderly woman's lips. "Eat slowly, Mama Yetunde. There's enough for both of us. Nobody is going to rush us today," Emeka said in a voice so soft and warm that it violently contrasted with the cold, calculated orders Kunle usually gave in that same house. The businessman felt his blood boil, but no longer with anger. It was with shame, a deep, corrosive, and crushing shame. In his mind, the medical team's warnings echoed like air raid sirens. "Sodium will raise her blood pressure, Mr. Adebayo. Saturated fat is an imminent risk of heart attack. You must maintain a bland, strict diet, without variations. If she gets agitated, give her the blue pill." Kunle had followed these instructions with religious devotion. He believed that by paying the best specialists and buying the most expensive medicines imported from Europe, he was being the best son in the world. He believed his money was an infallible shield against death, but seeing his mother smile, seeing the moist, lucid sparkle in her brown eyes as she looked at Emeka, Kunle understood the brutal and terrifying truth. He wasn't saving her, he was killing her with sadness. The tasteless pounded yam wasn't prolonging her life, it was only prolonging her agony. The blue pills that kept her sedated all day weren't for Yetunde's well-being, they were for the comfort of the nurses who didn't want to deal with her frustration. Emeka poured some fresh water into a normal glass. Yetunde drank with pleasure, and then let out a long sigh, leaning back in the chair. She seemed relaxed, she seemed at peace. Kunle leaned against the cold wall of the hidden corridor in the shadows. The lump in his throat was so large that it barely allowed him to breathe. He was about to witness something that would finally break the iron shell he had built around himself for years. The atmosphere in the dining room was about to change, and the millionaire businessman was completely defenseless against what was coming. The dialogue that broke the businessman. The afternoon sun began to descend, lengthening the shadows in the grand oak dining room. Mama Yetunde left the pizza crust on the porcelain plate. She sighed deeply with a serene smile on her face. Emeka began collecting the used serviettes with slow, calm movements, without interrupting the peace of the moment. "It's good you came today," Yetunde whispered suddenly. Her voice no longer had its former strength. Now it sounded fragile, distant, laden with heavy nostalgia. Emeka stopped, placed the serviettes on the table, and looked into the elderly woman's eyes. "I really like being here with you," the young caregiver replied, maintaining a soft, comforting tone. Yetunde raised a trembling hand. Her fingers, marked by age spots and intravenous lines, sought Emeka's hand on the tablecloth. The young woman didn't pull away. On the contrary, she enveloped the elderly woman's hand in hers, providing warmth. The silence in the house was absolute. Kunle, hidden a few meters away in the dark corridor, clenched his fists against the wall. His pulse pounded in his temples with painful force. "I was so afraid you wouldn't arrive," Yetunde continued, and suddenly her eyes filled with tears. They weren't tears of physical pain, but of a soul wound that Alzheimer's had failed to erase. "I knew today was your day off from university, but I was afraid you'd prefer to go out with your friends rather than come see this boring old woman." Emeka swallowed. Her back tensed imperceptibly. Kunle, from the darkness, frowned, confused. University. Emeka didn't go to university. She had barely finished public secondary school before starting to clean offices and homes. "I would never be too busy for you, Mama," Emeka said, her voice trembling just a fraction of a second before stabilizing. Yetunde squeezed the young woman's hand tighter. A solitary tear slid down her wrinkled cheek, shining under the golden sunlight. I missed you so much, Yejide. The name dropped into the dining room like a ton-weight bomb. In the hallway, Kunle stopped breathing. His knees buckled. He had to lean his entire weight against the marble wall to avoid collapsing to the floor. He brought both hands to his mouth to stifle a cry of pure pain that threatened to tear his throat. Yejide. Yejide was his younger sister. She had died in a car accident 22 years ago when she was barely a university student. Yejide's death had destroyed the Adebayo family, extinguished the light in Yetunde's eyes, and turned Kunle into the work-addicted, cold, and control-obsessed man he was today. The strict rules of Mama Yetunde's neurologists dictated an unbreakable protocol for such cases. Reality orientation therapy. The doctors had been emphatic with Kunle and all the household staff. If Yetunde mentioned Yejide, they had to correct her immediately. They had to tell her, looking her in the eyes, that Yejide was dead, that she had passed away decades ago, that the year was current, and that she was suffering from confusion. Kunle had seen the nurses do it. He had seen how, upon applying that cursed medical protocol, his mother's eyes filled with pure terror. He had seen Yetunde relive the devastating pain of losing her daughter for the first time, again and again, crying out, beating her chest, until despair forced the doctors to inject a strong sedative to silence her. That was the correct medical procedure. That was what his money paid for. From the gloom, with eyes flooded with burning tears, Kunle watched Emeka. He expected the cleaner to do as she was ordered. He expected her to break the spell, to tell the elderly woman she was confused, that she wasn't Yejide, that Yejide was in a cemetery. But Emeka Obi was not a cold doctor. She was a woman with an immense heart, who understood compassion far more than any white-coated specialist. Emeka looked into the elderly woman's pleading eyes. She saw the terror peeking out from Yetunde's gaze, the terrifying fear of loneliness, the fear of losing her daughter again. The young cleaner didn't hesitate. She bowed her head, pulled her chair closer, and stroked the woman's gray hair with infinite tenderness. I missed you very much too, Mama, Emeka said, her voice broken by emotion, accepting the role, sacrificing clinical truth to protect the elderly woman's shattered heart. I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. Yetunde closed her eyes and let out a sob of monumental relief. She brought Emeka's hand to her face and kissed it. Oh, my beautiful child, my precious child, Yetunde cried, smiling through tears, releasing years of accumulated anguish. Promise me you won't leave. Promise me you'll stay for dinner. Your Papa Segun will be home soon from work. And your brother too. As she mentioned Kunle, Yetunde's voice changed. It became heavier, laden with a deep concern that cut through the air. Kunle works too much, Yejide, Yetunde whispered, looking at Emeka intensely, as if confiding her greatest secret. He thinks I don't notice. He thinks that because I'm sick, I don't see things. But I do. I see him so tired, so alone. His heart is locked with a key, just like his father's. It pains my soul to see him like this. He buys all these medicines, brings all these strange people to the house because he's terrified of being alone. He thinks money can buy him time, but money doesn't hug, my child. Money doesn't say good morning. In the darkness of the hallway, the iron wall Kunle Adebayo had built for 20 years completely collapsed. The tears he never allowed anyone to see, the tears he didn't shed even at his father's funeral, began to fall uncontrollably down his face. He bit his lower lip so hard, he tasted metallic blood, desperately trying to stifle the sobs that racked his chest. There he was, the great millionaire, the business genius who believed he had the world at his feet, hidden like a thief in his own home, listening as his mother, with a brain devastated by Alzheimer's, understood his own misery and his loneliness much better than he had ever understood it himself. Yetunde wasn't crazy. Yetunde was trapped, and he was her jailer. He has a good heart, Mama, Emeka replied, wiping her own tears with the back of her free hand, defending the very man who had treated her with icy contempt that morning. Kunle loves you. Only sometimes people forget how to show it. Sometimes fear makes us act unlike ourselves. I know, Yejide, I know, Yetunde sighed, closing her eyes heavily, suddenly exhausted by the emotional deluge. The effect of Alzheimer's again clouded her mind like a receding tide. Help him, my child. Don't leave him alone. Promise me. I promise, Mama. I promise, Emeka whispered, kissing the elderly woman's forehead. Kunle couldn't bear it a second longer. The pain in his chest was physical, an unbearable pressure that threatened to suffocate him. He wanted to rush into the dining room. He wanted to fall to his knees in front of the wheelchair, hug his mother, ask her forgiveness for years of coldness, for the sedating pills, for treating her like a patient instead of a mother. He wanted to thank that young cleaner for giving Yetunde the most beautiful moment of peace in almost half a decade. He wiped his tears with the sleeve of his expensive designer suit, ruining the silk fabric. He took a shaky breath to steady himself. He was going to step out of the shadows. He was going to change everything. He was going to fire the doctors and hire Emeka full-time. He was going to be a real son. But fate and damaged pride have a cruel way of manifesting when one has lived too long in the dark. As he took the first step forward, determined to enter the sun-drenched dining room, Kunle's right foot accidentally hit the leather briefcase he had dropped minutes earlier. The thud of the heavy metal clasps against the marble floor resonated throughout the house like a gunshot. In the dining room, the magic shattered in a fraction of a second. Emeka released Yetunde's hand and jumped to her feet, pale as paper. Her heart hammered wildly in her chest. She knew that sound. She knew someone was in the hallway. She knew she had been discovered breaking each and every rule of the house. Yetunde's eyes snapped open, startled by the sudden noise, confusion seizing her face once more. The veil of Alzheimer's fell over her abruptly. The peace vanished. Mariana's face disappeared from her mind, and before her remained only a frightened young woman in a blue uniform. Kunle remained petrified in the doorway, his face still red from crying, his eyes fixed on the imminent disaster. The opportunity for redemption had abruptly closed, and now the confrontation he had so carefully planned was about to erupt in the worst possible way. The relentless confrontation, the echo of the heavy metal clasps hitting the marble floor shattered the dining room's atmosphere like a hammer blow against a glass mirror. In a fraction of a second, the warm bubble of memories and love Emeka had built for Mama Yetunde completely burst. The young caregiver, her face suddenly pale, jumped to her feet. Panic tightened her throat. Turning towards the dark corridor and seeing Kunle Adebayo's imposing figure silhouetted in the doorway, her hand trembled so violently that the porcelain plate she held slipped from her fingers. The plate shattered against the floor with a deafening crash. Remnants of pizza and cheese scattered across the immaculate dining room wood. Yetunde let out a choked cry. The sudden noise, the electric tension that had just invaded the room, and the terrified expression of the employee acted like a lethal poison on the elderly woman's fragile brain. The fog of Alzheimer's, which had miraculously dissipated for the past 20 minutes, fell upon her abruptly with brutal force. Yetunde's eyes began to dart frantically around the room. She no longer saw Yejide, her lost daughter. She no longer remembered her husband or Friday pizzas. Her breathing became agitated. Before her, there was only an unknown girl trembling with fear and a man in a dark suit with a disfigured face advancing towards them like a storm. Kunle Adebayo crossed the threshold and stepped into the dining room's light. Seconds earlier, in the darkness of the hallway, he was a broken son, crying tears of regret. But upon being discovered, upon seeing the exposed vulnerability on the employee's face, Kunle's oldest and most destructive defense mechanism automatically activated. His iron pride could not bear to feel weak. He could not allow the night shift cleaner to see him with reddened eyes and a shattered soul. So he did the only thing he knew how to do when he lost control of a situation: attack. He clenched his fists, tightened his jaw, and let fury, a fury born of his own shame, completely overwhelm him. "What in God's name is this?" Kunle roared. His deep, authoritative voice made the immense window panes tremble. Emeka took a step back, unknowingly stepping on broken porcelain shards. Her brown eyes were wide open, filled with tears of pure terror. She knew perfectly well who the man in front of her was. Kunle Adebayo was not just her boss. He was one of Lagos's most ruthless and vengeful businessmen, a man capable of destroying a person's life with a single phone call. "Mr. Adebayo, I can explain, please," Emeka stammered, her voice broken, interlacing her trembling hands at chest height. "I just wanted to." "Silence," Kunle interrupted, taking 2 quick strides until he was less than a meter from her. His presence was suffocating, a wall of power and aggression. "I asked you a direct question, Emeka. What is this rubbish doing on my mother's table? Are you stupid, or did you simply decide to ignore the medical orders I gave you barely 2 hours ago?" He pointed an accusing finger at the greasy cardboard boxes resting on the imported tablecloth. The image contrasted so violently with the house's clinical perfection that it seemed a direct insult to his authority. "Sir, please, I beg you," Emeka pleaded, warm tears sliding down her cheeks. Mama Yetunde hadn't swallowed the pounded yam for 3 full days. Every time I tried to give her the supplements, she'd spit them out and cry. She was losing weight. She was losing the light in her eyes. The doctors only wanted to sedate her, but she doesn't need sedatives, sir. She was hungry for something real, hungry for a memory. The truth, in Emeka's words, struck Kunle in the chest like a sledgehammer, because he himself, hidden in the shadows minutes before, had confirmed that the young woman was right. He had seen his mother smile as she hadn't in years. He had heard the lucidity in her voice, but Kunle's wounded ego was an untamable monster. To admit that the cleaner was right meant admitting that he, with all his millions, had failed utterly. It meant accepting that he had tortured his own mother for months under the false shield of medical science, and he was not willing to break down in front of a service employee. Hungry for a memory? Kunle scoffed, letting out a cold, dry laugh devoid of all humanity, a laugh that chilled Emeka's blood. Since when are you a neurologist? Since when does your public school certificate give you the right to diagnose my mother and decide what's best for her? You are the cleaning lady. Yetunde, hunched in her wheelchair, began to sob silently. She brought her wrinkled hands to her ears, trying to block out the shouting. The violence in her son's voice caused her deep terror, although her sick mind no longer understood why they were fighting. You're playing with her life, Kunle continued shouting, moving even closer to Emeka, cornering her against the edge of the oak table. The cardiologist was perfectly clear. An alteration in her sodium levels could cause a fulminant heart attack. What did you want, Emeka? To kill her so you wouldn't have to wipe her drool in the afternoons? Is that it? The accusation was so cruel, so absolutely perverse and unjust, that Emeka felt breathless. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but only a choked sob escaped her throat. The pain of being accused of wanting to murder the woman she had just embraced with her whole soul was too much. No, no, for God's sake, no, Emeka cried, shaking her head desperately, looking at Yetunde, who trembled with fear. I love her. I only wanted to see her happy for a moment. She called me by her daughter's name, Mr. Adebayo. She asked me not to leave her alone. She was at peace. She was completely at peace. Kunle's face contorted into a grimace of pure agony, disguised as anger. Hearing Emeka mention Yejide was the last straw. His breathing became heavy, almost erratic. Guilt was devouring him alive inside, but on the outside, he transformed into a machine of destruction. My sister is dead, Kunle roared, slamming his closed fist on the oak table. The thud made the water glasses jump. She's been dead for 22 years. Playing along with my mother's hallucinations is severe medical negligence. You are sinking her deeper into her dementia. You are destroying the protocol I pay thousands of naira to maintain. Kunle reached a trembling hand into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out his latest generation cell phone. The screen illuminated his disfigured face. It's over, he stated in a dangerously low voice, a whisper laden with venom that promised the end of the world for the young woman. Gather your things. You are fired, and pray that tonight I don't send my lawyers to the police station to file formal charges for attempted homicide, for medical negligence. I will make sure, Emeka Obi, that you never get another damn job in this entire state. I will crush you. Emeka felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Absolute terror paralyzed her. If she were sued, if her name were stained with a criminal record, she would not only lose this job, she would lose the ability to support her own younger siblings. She would fall into absolute destitution. She fell to her knees over the remnants of pizza and broken glass from the plate, not caring that a sharp piece of porcelain slightly cut her trouser fabric at the shin. Mr. Adebayo, I beg you, by all that is sacred, Emeka cried from the floor, clasping her hands in a gesture of desperate plea, completely humbling herself before the overwhelming power of the millionaire. Fire me, don't pay me this month if you wish, but please don't sue me. I have a family that depends on me. I have 2 younger siblings who eat from my salary. I swear to God that my only intention was to give your mother love. A love that in this house, Emeka bit her tongue just in time. She was about to say a love that no one gives her in this house. But Kunle perfectly understood the unfinished sentence, and his eyes became bloodshot. He was about to raise his voice again. He was going to destroy her with the worst threat his brilliant and twisted mind could formulate. But then the impossible happened. A shield of glass, a sharp, screeching metallic sound cut through the dining room's tension. It was the sound of Yetunde's wheelchair wheels abruptly sliding against the wooden floor. Kunle stopped dead, phone still in hand. He looked down, confused. Emeka also stopped crying for a fraction of a second, raising her tear-soaked face. Mama Yetunde, the fragile woman, medicated into lethargy, diagnosed with severe muscular weakness that prevented her from walking more than 2 meters without assistance, was clinging to the armrests of her chair with both hands. Her knuckles were white from the colossal effort she was making. Her face, furrowed with deep wrinkles, was contorted in a grimace of evident physical pain. Her knees trembled visibly beneath her soft fabric trousers, threatening to give way at any moment under the weight of her own body. "Mama, what are you doing?" Kunle murmured, suddenly alarmed, forgetting for a second his role as executioner. "No, don't get up, you'll fall. The doctors said that." But Yetunde didn't listen. Or perhaps she did, but decided that the voice of that man in a dark suit held no authority over her. With a muffled groan of effort, ignoring the creaking of her joints, rusted by forced inactivity and medication, Mama Yetunde stood up. Her body swayed dangerously forward. Kunle dropped his phone, which hit the floor with a dry thud, and made a move to run and support her, terrified that his mother might fracture her hip. "Don't touch me!" Yetunde's cry was like a whip. It wasn't a confused babble. It wasn't the lament of an Alzheimer's patient. It was the firm, authoritative, and protective voice of the matriarch she once had been. Pushing her way through the dense fog of her crumbling brain, Kunle froze midway with his hands extended in the air, his eyes wide with shock. Yetunde breathed with difficulty. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, but she did not sit back down. With short, dragging, agonizing steps, navigating the broken porcelain shards, she walked slowly until she positioned herself directly between the enraged businessman and the young employee, still kneeling on the floor. Yetunde, in her pale yellow Ankara blouse and hunched shoulders, stood facing her millionaire son. She was a human shield, a fragile, trembling, and sacred crystal shield ready to break, before allowing anyone to hurt the girl who had given her back her life. "Mama Yetunde, no, please sit down, it's hurting you," Emeka pleaded from the floor, stretching out a hand to gently touch the elderly woman's ankle, terrified of the consequences of such physical exertion. Yetunde ignored Emeka. Her gaze, unusually sharp and full of fire, was fixed directly on Kunle's eyes. The millionaire felt himself shrink under the weight of that gaze. It had been years since his mother looked him in the eyes with such intensity. She wasn't looking at him with the emptiness of dementia. She was looking at him with disappointment. "You will not shout at her," Yetunde said. Her voice trembled from lack of air, but every word was pronounced with chilling clarity. "In this house, we do not shout at people with good hearts." Kunle swallowed, feeling an invisible fist squeeze his esophagus. "Mama, please, are you confused?" Kunle tried to argue, using his condescending tone, the same one he used when Yetunde had nervous crises. "This woman is hurting you. She broke the medical rules. She gave you food that could kill you. I'm trying to protect you. You need to get back in your chair. You're going to get hurt. Lie." Yetunde cut him off, raising a trembling hand and pointing it directly at her son's chest. "You don't protect me. You keep me locked up." The silence that followed that declaration was absolute. It seemed that the very air had been sucked out of the immense house. Yetunde began to gasp. Exhaustion threatened to collapse her, but her maternal instinct, provoked by the crying of the young woman behind her, burned stronger than any neurological disease. Her mind was shattered. She didn't know what day it was. She couldn't remember what she had for breakfast, and at times, she forgot that her daughter Yejid was dead. But the primary emotions, love, fear, injustice, and loneliness, remained intact at the core of her being. "I don't know your name," Yetunde whispered, looking at Kunle with a painful confusion that shattered the businessman's soul into 1,000 pieces. "Sometimes I know you are my son. Other times, I just see a cruel man dressed in black who comes into my house to give me orders and make me swallow pills that take away my sleep." Kunle felt the ground open beneath his Italian shoes. His own body began to tremble. The powerful and untouchable man was being completely annihilated by the fragile words of his sick mother. I am Kunle. Mama, I am your son. I do all this for you. I pay for everything so you can live," he stammered, tears welling up in his eyes again, his armor irreversibly cracking. "Then, if you are my son, why do you leave me so alone?" Yetunde asked. The question had no malice, only an innocent, profound pain. "Why do you let those men in white coats tie me to the bed when I'm scared? Why do you hide my memories?" Yetunde paused, gasping for air, then pointed weakly back, towards the girl still kneeling, crying silently. She is the only one who looks me in the eyes," the elderly woman continued, breaking Kunle's last defense. "She is the only one who doesn't treat me like broken furniture. She gave me something to eat that tasted like home. She made me remember that I was once happy." and you come in screaming like a monster wanting to destroy her. Yetunde took a small step forward, closing the distance with her son, defying all his power, all his money, and all his wounded pride. And you throw this good child out onto the street, Yetunde declared, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Then promise me you'll also open the door for me, because I'd rather die of hunger in the street with someone who embraces me than live 100 years in this crystal prison with you. Yetunde's body could not take any more. The adrenaline of the confrontation abruptly ran out like a match extinguishing in water. Her knees finally gave way, bending under her own weight. "Mama," Kunle cried, reacting instinctively, lunging forward to catch her before her head hit the marble floor. But Emeka was faster. With an agility born of pure devotion, she jumped up, ignoring the cut on her own leg, and embraced Mama Yetunde's collapsing body, cushioning her fall. The two women ended up on the floor, surrounded by pizza remnants and broken glass. Yetunde had closed her eyes. The great physical effort had left her unconscious. Emeka held the elderly woman's head in her lap, stroking her forehead, crying inconsolably, while murmuring prayers in a low voice. Kunle stood before them, his arms hanging uselessly at his sides. He had just heard the most brutal condemnation of his entire life, delivered by the lips of the only person for whom he would have given his life. The great millionaire's pride had been crushed, but instead of accepting the lesson, instead of kneeling beside Emeka to help his mother, the terror of seeing himself reflected as a monster pushed him to commit the biggest, darkest, and most unforgivable mistake of his entire existence. The unforgivable mistake. Mama Yetunde's collapsed body weighed like lead on Emeka's legs. The young caregiver, kneeling on the broken porcelain shards, cradled the elderly woman's shoulders with absolute desperation. She wept silently, gently rocking her, staining her blue uniform with the cold sweat that beaded on Yetunde's forehead. Kunle Adebayo, the man who feared no financial rival, was paralyzed by terror. The echo of his mother's last words still bounced off the walls of the immense dining room, drilling into his skull. "I'd rather die in the street than continue living in this prison with you." Humiliation burned in his veins. The pain of being rejected in such a way in front of a simple employee activated a poisonous and destructive defense mechanism within him. Instead of bending to the truth, Kunle clung to blind fury, his face hardened like the marble he stood upon. He advanced with heavy, violent steps towards the two women. "Let her go," Kunle roared, abruptly bending down and pushing Emeka away with brutal force. The young woman lost her balance and fell backward, cutting the palm of her hand on a fragment of the broken plate. A trickle of blood began to flow, mixing with the pizza grease scattered on the floor. But Kunle didn't care. He only cared about regaining control. "Don't touch her like that. Sir, she's unconscious," Emeka cried, pressing her injured hand against her chest, terrified by the millionaire's abrupt manipulation of his mother's fragile body. "I told you to shut up," Kunle bellowed, lifting Yetunde into his arms with superhuman effort. The elderly woman's head hung limply backward. Her breathing was a weak, choked wheeze. "You caused this. You broke her diet. You agitated her mind with your absurd games. You pushed her to her limits. She only wanted love. She wanted to feel alive." Emeka cried from the floor, trembling from head to toe, unable to contain the helplessness that tore at her throat. "You don't understand anything. Don't you see she's dying of sadness?" Kunle stopped dead. The muscles in his jaw tightened almost to breaking point. He looked at Emeka with such dark, absolute contempt that the young woman felt the air freeze around her. "No, you are the one who doesn't understand," Kunle hissed in a low, icy voice that was more frightening than his shouts. "You are an intruder, an ignorant person who came to soil my house and put my mother's life at risk for a stupid whim of cheap kindness." He held Yetunde against his chest and gave Emeka the look of an executioner pronouncing sentence. "Get out of my house, right now." The entire world crumbled on Emeka's shoulders. "Mr. Adebayo, please," the young woman pleaded, struggling to her feet, ignoring the burning in her hand and cut leg. "I beg you, by all that is sacred, fire me if you want, but don't withhold my salary. I've been working double shifts for a month. My younger siblings are waiting for me. Our room rent is due tomorrow. If I don't bring that money, we'll be thrown onto the street." A dull thunder rumbled in the distance. The Lagos sky, which minutes before had shone with the afternoon sun, had covered itself with black, heavy clouds. The storm was about to break. Kunle didn't blink. Empathy had been completely devoured by his wounded pride. "Your salary?" Kunle scoffed, letting out a bitter laugh devoid of all humanity. "You should thank God I don't call the police right now to have you arrested for criminal negligence and harming the health of an elderly adult. You want money? Sue me and see how long your public defender lasts against my legal firm." Emeka opened her mouth, but no words came out. The level of cruelty of that man left her breathless. She understood in that instant that there was nothing human to appeal to. She was facing a money-making machine, an empty man who had replaced his heart with a safe. "I'm not paying you a single kobo," Kunle stated, turning on his heel to leave the dining room. "You have 5 minutes to collect your rubbish from the staff quarters and get out. If you're still here when I come down, the security guards at the gate will drag you out." Kunle walked away down the corridor, carrying Yetunde in his arms, disappearing into the darkness of the main staircase. Emeka was left alone amidst the disaster. The silence that followed was sepulchral, oppressive, broken only by the first crash of furious rain against the immense glass windows. She didn't collect her things. She had nothing of value in that staff room anyway. With tears blinding her vision, her hand bleeding, and her soul shattered, she shuffled towards the back door. She stepped into the service alley. Just as the sky fully opened, the freezing rain soaked her in seconds. Emeka walked aimlessly under the storm, shivering with cold and fear, not knowing how she would look her younger siblings in the eyes that night to tell them there would be no food. Inside the mansion, Kunle laid his mother on the immense hospital bed that dominated her luxurious room. He took her pulse. It was weak, but stable. He covered her with thermal blankets and closed the opaque curtains, plunging the room into perpetual gloom. He descended the stairs slowly. The sound of his own footsteps was unbearable. He reached the dining room. The ruined pizza was still there, scattered on the floor, along with the broken glass and Emeka's bloodstains. The smell of cheese and pepperoni still lingered in the air, refusing to disappear, reminding him with every breath of the exact moment his mother had been happy. Kunle stood in front of the window, pounded by the rain. He had won. He had defended his territory. He had asserted his authority and expelled the threat. The medical protocol was safe again, but as he looked at the dark garden through the bulletproof glass, the millionaire felt a void so deep in his stomach that it made him nauseous. The entire house felt like a gigantic, silent tomb. His victory had the bitter taste of ash, the collapse. The next morning arrived without sun. The sky was still tinged with a leaden gray, and the Adebayo mansion was engulfed in an atmosphere of maximum clinical tension. It was 8 o'clock. Dr. Emeka Eze, a neurologist in tailored suits, and a briefcase full of latest generation sedatives, stood by Mama Yetunde's bed. Beside him, 2 robust nurses in impeccable white uniforms awaited orders. Kunle observed the scene from the doorway with his arms crossed over his chest. He hadn't slept a single minute. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed the psychological war he had waged all night in the solitude of his study. "Her vital signs are altered, Mr. Adebayo," Dr. Emeka reported, coldly adjusting his glasses. "Yesterday's crisis raised her blood pressure to dangerous levels. The event has pushed her into a phase of acute, aggressive disorientation. I had already warned you. Any stimulus outside the norm, any alteration in her sterile routine, would cause a massive setback in her condition." The doctor spoke of Yetunde as if she were a broken engine, not a human being. Kunle swallowed, feeling a sudden aversion to that monotonous, dispassionate tone, a tone he himself had demanded and applauded for years. In the center of the room, on the white sheets, Yetunde was living an absolute hell. She wasn't catatonic as in previous weeks. She was terrified. Her eyes, bloodshot with panic, darted from one corner of the room to another. She breathed in short, desperate gasps. Her hands were clenched into fists so tight that her nails dug into her palms. "No, go away. Stay away from me," Yetunde cried in a hoarse voice that broke with effort. One of the nurses tried to approach her with a metal tray containing a plastic cup of thick pounded yam and a syringe with her morning medicines. "Mama Yetunde, please, you must have breakfast. Open your mouth," the nurse ordered, moving the spoon with a mechanical motion devoid of any warmth. Yetunde let out a shriek of desperation. With a quick, unexpected movement, she raised her arm and struck the tray with all her might. The green pounded yam, the plastic cups, and the medicines flew through the air, crashing against the silk-lined wall and staining the immaculate floor. "I don't want your poison," Yetunde cried, retreating until she hit the headboard of the bed, hugging her knees, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. "I want my child. I want Yejide. Bring my child." The name cut through the air of the room. Kunle felt an ice needle pierce his heart. "Madame, Yejide is not here. You know Yejide passed away," Dr. Emeka said, applying the cruel reality orientation therapy with the same naturalness he would tell the time. The effect was devastating. Yetunde brought her hands to her head, pulling at her own grey hair, and let out a tearing scream, a primitive lament full of agony that chilled everyone's blood in the room. Reliving her daughter's death again in that state of absolute vulnerability completely destroyed her. No, it's a lie. She was here yesterday. She fed me. She hugged me. Yetunde cried inconsolably, her face soaked in tears, frantically searching among the shadows of the room for the figure of the young woman in the blue uniform. Yejide, you promised me you wouldn't leave. Don't leave me alone with these monsters. Kunle leaned against the doorframe. His legs failed him. The image of his mother begging for Amaka's presence was an unbearable torture. Don't leave me alone with these monsters, she had said. And Kunle knew perfectly well that he was the leader of those monsters. Hold here, doctor. Emeka ordered in a flat voice, losing patience. He opened his black leather briefcase and took out a pre-filled syringe with a transparent liquid. The nervous agitation is escalating. I am going to administer 5 milligrams of haloperidol. That will keep her sedated for the next 14 hours. The 2 robust nurses advanced towards the bed without hesitation. Each grabbed Yetunde by an arm. The elderly woman struggled with the strength of desperation. Let me go, you're hurting me. Kunle, son, help me, Yetunde cried, seeking her son's eyes in the doorway, asking for help for the first time in years. Kunle watched the scene as if in slow motion. He saw the nurse's rough hands squeezing his mother's fragile forearms, leaving red marks on her paper-thin skin. He saw the sharp needle in Dr. Emeka's hand, gleaming under the fluorescent lights of the clinical lamps, ready to shut down the brain of the woman who had given him life. And suddenly, like lightning, the image from the previous afternoon flashed through his mind. He saw Amaka's hands, soft and warm, holding Yetunde's trembling hand. He saw the young caregiver's smile. He saw the steaming slice of pizza. He heard his mother's vibrant laughter. He remembered Amaka's sweet voice saying, I would never be too busy for you, Mama. Amaka had given her life. Dr. Emeka was about to inject her with a living death. Dr. Emeka raised the syringe, removed the protective cap from the needle with his teeth, and approached the exposed shoulder of the elderly woman who writhed in terror. This will be quick, Mama Yetunde. Stop struggling, the doctor murmured. But the needle never touched the skin. A firm hand, violent and trembling with pure rage, grabbed Dr. Emeka's wrist in midair, stopping him dead. The doctor turned his head, surprised. The nurses froze. It was Kunle, the businessman, his eyes bloodshot, the veins in his neck bulging with tension, and his face contorted by a protective fury he had never felt before. Let her go this instant, Kunle said. His voice was not a shout. It was a low, guttural growl, laden with such a real threat of death that Dr. Emeka instinctively dropped the syringe. The syringe fell to the floor and rolled under the bed. I said, let her go. Kunle roared, brutally shoving the 2 nurses, forcing them to stumble backward. Yetunde, freed, curled into a ball in the center of the bed, crying, terrified, hugging herself. Mr. Adebayo, what are you doing? Doctor, Emeka protested, rubbing his injured wrist, indignant at the disrespect. Protocol demands immediate sedation for an aggressive state. It's for her own good. Kunle looked him up and down with infinite disgust. For the first time in years, he saw reality without the filter of his millionaire pride, the sterility, the cruelty, and the uselessness of everything he had bought. Get out, Kunle spat. Take your damned needles, your tasteless purees, and your miserable diagnoses, and get out of my house. You're all fired. This is madness, Dr. Emeka cried, gathering his briefcase, offended. Without our expert care, your mother won't last a month. With your expert care, my mother has been dead for 5 years, Kunle replied with a cutting coldness that left no room for reply. Get out of here. If you're not on the street in 3 minutes, I'll call security to have you thrown out by force. The doctor and nurses didn't wait for a second warning. They rushed out of the room, muttering indignantly. The slamming door echoed in the room, followed by a heavy, tense silence. Kunle was left alone with his mother. Yetunde was still crying in bed, trembling uncontrollably, whispering Yejide's name over and over between broken sobs. The businessman, the man who believed he could buy tranquility with 9-figure checks, fell to his knees beside the bed. The crushing weight of his guilt shattered his bones. He tried to touch his mother's hand, but she recoiled, shying away from his touch, looking at him with a deep terror that hurt Kunle more than a stab wound. He couldn't calm her. He didn't know how. He was just the repentant executioner, but the damage was already done. He looked at the floor where the green pounded yam stained the walls and the syringe lay abandoned. He remembered Amaka's terrified gaze the night before under the storm. He remembered her pleading words, My younger siblings are waiting for me. If I don't bring that money, we'll be thrown onto the street. He had destroyed the only person capable of saving his mother. He himself had thrown away the miracle he had been searching for. Kunle hid his face in his hands, and for the first time in his adult life, he cried with pure desperation. He cried for his mother, he cried for his arrogance, and he cried for the urgent and terrifying need to find a young cleaner in a city of 5 million inhabitants. The diary in the staff quarters, the silence that fell over the immense mansion after the abrupt departure of the medical team was sepulchral, a vacuum so heavy it seemed to crush the oxygen. In the luxurious silk-walled room, Mama Yetunde had finally stopped screaming. The physical and emotional exhaustion had been so extreme that her fragile body simply shut down, surrendering to a restless sleep filled with sporadic tremors. There was no need to inject her with the sedative poison Dr. Emeka intended to use to erase her consciousness. It only took the terror disappearing from her sight. Kunle Adebayo remained on his knees beside the immense clinical bed for what seemed like hours, unable to articulate a single word, his breath short and his eyes fixed on his mother's pale, tear-streaked face. Guilt was a living beast devouring his insides. He had been on the verge of allowing them to shut down the brain of the woman who gave him life. All for his absurd obstinacy in maintaining a clinical protocol that served absolutely no purpose other than to feed his own illusion of control. He had expelled the only person who had managed to make her smile in 5 cursed years. He had thrown Emeka out into the storm without a kobo, humiliating her and threatening to destroy her. Suddenly, a brutal urgency, an almost animal desperation, seized the businessman. He had to find her. He had to repair the catastrophic damage his arrogance had caused. Kunle jumped to his feet, wiping his damp face with the sleeves of his expensive dark suit, now wrinkled and shapeless. He left his mother's room, making sure to leave the door ajar to hear her breathing, and ran down the marble corridor with a haste bordering on panic. His heavy shoes echoed like hammer blows in the house's sepulchral silence. He descended the immense main staircase, skipping steps 2 by 2, ignoring the vertigo and fatigue of having not slept all night. He reached the ground floor and crossed the immaculate kitchen, flinging open the swinging door that connected to the laundry area and the internal staff quarters. The temperature here was noticeably colder. It was an area of the house Kunle never trod, an invisible world designed for employees to enter and exit without disrupting the mansion's crystal and luxury aesthetic. He stopped in front of the wooden door of the staff room Emeka had occupied for the last month during her strenuous double shifts. He pushed the handle. The door creaked slightly as it opened, revealing a minuscule space, barely large enough for a single bed with rough sheets, a small metal wardrobe, and a chipboard nightstand. The room was completely dark. The only light came from the small, high window that let in the grayish glow of the cloudy morning. It smelled of damp, cheap cleaning products and the previous night's rain. Kunle turned on the bare bulb hanging from the ceiling and felt a pang of shame at seeing the absolute austerity of the place. He slept on imported Egyptian cotton sheets, while the young woman who cared for his mother's soul rested on a sagging mattress that wouldn't have been fit for his business partner's dogs. Emeka had left almost nothing. Thrown out with such violence, she had barely had time to grab her small backpack. The metal wardrobe was wide open, showing its completely empty interior. There were no uniforms, no spare shoes, no personal items, nothing. "Think, Kunle, think," he murmured to himself in a hoarse voice, running both hands through his disheveled hair in a gesture of pure desperation. There must be a copy of her ID, a contract, a resume. The employment agency opens at noon. I can't wait that long. I need her address right now. He began to search the small room with frantic movements. He opened the only drawer of the nightstand with such force that he almost ripped it from its metal runners. It was empty. He checked under the bed, lifted the worn mattress, raising a cloud of stagnant dust. He searched behind the door. Nothing. Emeka was a ghost who had passed through that house, leaving only the imprint of her goodness and disappearing, without a single bureaucratic trace. Kunle let out a grunt of frustration and punched the wall with his closed fist. Feeling panic threatened to paralyze him. He slumped heavily onto the edge of the single bed, burying his face in his hands, breathing raggedly. He had lost. He had destroyed his last chance at redemption, and now he couldn't even find the victim of his fury to beg for forgiveness. But then, looking up, his gaze fixed on a minuscule detail. Between the narrow space separating the nightstand and the peeling wall, the corner of a rectangular object poked out, an object that, by its opaque color and texture, did not belong to the house's standard decor. Kunle frowned, leaned forward, and slid his long fingers into the crack. His fingertips touched the rough cardboard, and he pulled it out slowly. What he pulled from that dark corner was not a resume or an official identification document. It was a cheap exercise book, a spiral-bound notebook with a dark blue cardboard cover, visibly worn from constant rubbing. The corners were bent, some pages poked out irregularly, and the cover had small stains that looked like coffee or perhaps dried tears. It was the most insignificant and humble object Kunle had held in his hands in his entire adult life. He turned it over slowly, feeling a strange reverence. In the center of the blue cover, written in a round, simple hand with a black ink pen, was a title that made him stop dead. His heart pounded painfully in his chest. It didn't say cleaning notes. It didn't say shift schedules. The notebook was titled, Things That Make Mama Yetunde Smile. The weight of gold. Kunle Adebayo felt the air freeze in his lungs. His fingers, accustomed to signing multi-million naira contracts and holding baccarat crystal glasses, trembled visibly as he held that cheap cardboard exercise book. The sound of the wind hitting the small window of the staff quarters seemed to have vanished from the entire universe in that precise and devastating instant. There was only him and that worn piece of paper. With agonizing slowness, as if he were about to defuse a bomb that could tear him into 1,000 pieces, Kunle opened the first page. Emeka's handwriting filled each line with meticulous order. There were no strike-throughs. It was an intimate, detailed, and profoundly painful record, written by someone who had decided to observe the soul of a sick elderly woman when everyone else only saw a defective body. The first date corresponded to Emeka's first week of work. Kunle read in a low voice, his throat tight with an unbearable lump. Today, Dr. Emeka shouted at Mama Yetunde because she didn't want to swallow the blue pill. He said it was neurological aggression. I stayed cleaning dust near the window and looked into her eyes. It wasn't aggression. It was pure terror. The doctor smells of clinical alcohol and wears a cold metal watch that scrapes her skin when he takes her pulse. Yetunde doesn't hate medicine. She hates feeling like a piece of meat in an abattoir. When the doctor left, I secretly made her some herbal tea. I let it cool and gave it to her in a porcelain cup with flowers. I told her it was Papa Segun's secret recipe. She drank it all down to the last drop and gave me her first smile. She doesn't need sedatives. She needs to be treated like a human being. A solitary, heavy, burning tear escaped Kunle's right eye and fell directly onto the word abattoir, slightly blurring the black ink. The businessman brought a trembling hand to his mouth, trying to stifle the groan of pain that threatened to tear his throat. He paid Dr. Emeka N5 million weekly to torture his mother. And this girl, earning minimum wage, had discovered the problem in 3 days just by observing a cold metal watch and preparing herbal tea. He turned the page urgently, feeling his heart hammer against his ribs with destructive force. He needed to read more. He needed to understand the immensity of his own failure. The next entry was dated 2 weeks ago. Mr. Adebayo visited today. He entered the room, asked the nurses about her blood pressure levels, checked his watch, and left in less than 4 minutes. He didn't touch her. He didn't give her a kiss. Mama Yetunde kept staring at the empty door for 2 whole hours. She cried silently, clutching the bed blanket. When I approached to wipe her tears, she looked at me with such sadness that my heart felt like it was breaking in two. She told me, "My son doesn't love me, Emeka. I am a nuisance that costs a lot of money." I stroked her hair and had to lie to save what little hope she had left. I told her, "Mr. Kunle works from sunup to sundown to buy you the stars, Mama, because you are the most important thing in his life." She closed her eyes and whispered, "I don't want the stars. I just want him to sit on my bed and hug me, even if I forget his name." The sound that escaped Kunle's lips was not a sob. It was a muffled howl of pure agony. The man of iron, the giant of finance, completely collapsed. The exercise book slipped from his hands and fell to the floor as he hunched over the miserable mattress, clutching his stomach, rocking back and forth in the most absolute and wretched emotional darkness. The revelation was a brutal blow, a hammer shattering the bulletproof glass of his arrogance. Everything he had believed for the past 5 years was a colossal lie. He had built a financial empire, believing that money was the answer to the tragedy of his father's death and the advance of Alzheimer's. He had armored his heart, convincing himself that keeping Yetunde alive in a sterile cage with the best machines and the most expensive doctors in the country was the supreme act of love. He thought his emotional distance was a show of strength, that protecting himself from the pain of seeing his mother deteriorate was necessary to continue paying the bills. But the diary of that humble young woman written with minor grammatical errors and full of coffee stains, contained more wisdom, more science, and more love than all the medical records in the world combined. Emeka Obi was not a cleaner breaking the rules. She was the only person in that crystal house who was fighting to keep Yetunde's soul alive, while he, the perfect son, was killing her alive with his terrifying coldness. Kunle knelt on the floor of the staff quarters, not caring that dust soiled his knees, and picked up the exercise book with trembling hands, treating it as if it were the most valuable sacred relic on the face of the earth. He opened it to the last pages, desperately searching for something more, a final sign, the climax of the tragedy he himself had orchestrated. The final entry was written in hurried handwriting, with strong strokes that denoted intense emotion. It was dated the day before, hours before he faked his trip to London to catch her in his cowardly trap. Mama Yetunde hasn't eaten the green pounded yam for 3 days. The doctors say it's defiance. I know it's not. The green color of the pounded yam is the same color as the walls of the emergency room, where her daughter Yejide passed away 22 years ago. Alzheimer's erases her present, but it stabs the traumas of the past into her chest like sharp knives, forcing her to eat, that is, forcing her to relive her child's death with every bite. I can't bear to see her suffer like this. Today I am going to break the diet, whatever the cost. I'm going to bring her a pepperoni pizza. It's junk food, I know, but Yetunde once told me it's what they ate on Fridays when their family was complete and happy. If Mr. Adebayo discovers me, I know he will fire me. I know he is a cruel man, a man of ice whose heart is locked with 1,000 padlocks. I am afraid of what he might do to me because my younger siblings need me, and if I lose my job, we will be on the streets. But I prefer to face the fury of that soulless millionaire than to allow Mama Yetunde to spend another day in this white hell. Today my mama will smile, even if it's the last thing I do in this house. The last words were like a point-blank shot to Kunle's forehead. I prefer to face the fury of that soulless millionaire. That was the image Emeka had of him, and she hadn't been wrong. He had been an absolute monster. Emeka had risked absolutely everything. Her job, the roof over her younger siblings' heads, her own food security, for the simple, pure, and divine act of giving 5 minutes of happiness to a broken elderly woman. And how had Kunle repaid that sacred sacrifice? By throwing her onto the street during a torrential storm, shouting in her face, denying her wages, and threatening to destroy her legally. He had left her at the mercy of destitution while he slept on silk sheets. The weight of all his gold, all his millions, his businesses, his armored cars, and his power fell upon his shoulders with a crushing force, and he discovered that they were worth absolutely nothing. His entire empire was rubbish compared to the immensity of the heart of the woman he had just destroyed. Forgive me, my God. Kunle sobbed in the agonizing solitude of that empty staff room, pressing the blue exercise book against his chest with such force that the metal spirals dug into his skin through his designer shirt. Tears burned his face, soaking the cheap cardboard, cleansing 20 years of arrogance, pride, and repressed pain. The relentless businessman had died in that instant, killed by the truth emblazoned on the pages of a service employee. He remained there on his knees in the dust for 10 long minutes, letting the crying wash his corrupted soul, accepting the totality of his guilt, embracing the deepest, purest shame he had ever experienced. But pain and guilt were not enough. Repentance without action was just another form of cowardice, and Kunle Adebayo had been a coward for too long. He lifted his head. His red eyes, swollen and furrowed with tears, filled with a fierce determination, a new and burning fire that was born not of pride, but of the humblest desperation. He stood up, automatically brushing the dust from his trousers. He looked at the blue exercise book he held in his right hand. He didn't know where Emeka lived. He didn't have her address. He didn't have her phone number, her full surname, or any references in that house devoid of humanity. Lagos was an asphalt monster with 20 million inhabitants, an infinite labyrinth where a poor and resourceful young woman could disappear forever in a matter of hours. But Kunle swore in silence, clenching his jaw with an iron conviction that he would overturn every stone on every street in the city if necessary. He would burn his entire fortune, empty his bank accounts, put every private detective in the country to find her. He didn't care about the cost. He didn't care about the time. He was going to find Emeka Obi, and when he found her, he would not present himself as the great Mr. Adebayo, the arrogant boss who demanded respect and dictated absurd clinical rules. He was going to present himself as the repentant son who did not deserve the miracle she had given his mother. He was going to kneel before her in the midst of her reality's misery and beg her to teach him how to love again. He ran out of the staff quarters, crossed the house like a hurricane, and went through the main bulletproof glass door, facing the storm that still lashed the city, ready to descend into hell to find the woman who held the key to his mother's heaven. The search in the mud. The engine of the enormous black SUV roared with a ferocity that made the mansion's windows tremble. Kunle Adebayo accelerated fiercely, tearing up the immaculate lawn of the driveway as the storm lashed the windshield with merciless violence. His hands, gripping the leather-wrapped steering wheel, trembled uncontrollably. Beside him, in the passenger seat, rested the cheap blue cardboard exercise book, the compass that had just shattered his world of lies and now pointed the only path to salvation. He didn't have the exact address, but he had the power of an empire at his disposal. Through the vehicle's hands-free system, he called his HR director. It was 10 a.m. on a Saturday, but Kunle accepted no excuses. In a broken, hoarse voice laden with life-or-death urgency, he ordered them to track the records of the cleaning outsourcing agency. He threatened to fire the entire board of directors if he didn't have Emeka Obi's exact GPS coordinates in 10 minutes. 9 minutes later, the dashboard screen lit up with a red dot. The destination was almost 20 kilometers away in one of the most marginalized, poor, and forgotten settlements on the outskirts of Lagos. A place where asphalt did not exist, where streets turned into rivers of brown mud every time the sky wept, and where houses were built with unpainted grey blocks, corrugated tin roofs, and broken hopes. As Kunle drove away from his bubble of crystal and luxury, the urban landscape became increasingly bleak. The rain fell in torrents, flooding the undrained streets. The armored SUV, a status symbol that cost more than the entire block he was traversing, moved with difficulty through the enormous potholes and puddles of murky water. People sheltering under makeshift tarpaulin roofs looked at the vehicle with suspicion. Suddenly, the tires skidded. The dense, slippery mud trapped the front wheels of the heavy SUV in the middle of a steep, unpaved street. The vehicle could not move another meter. The GPS indicated that Emeka's house was 300 meters uphill, in a narrow alley impassable for cars. At any other moment in his life, Kunle Adebayo would have cursed, called a rescue team, and never stepped out of his car. But the man inside that vehicle was no longer the untouchable millionaire. He was a desperate son who felt time slipping away like sand through his fingers. He turned off the engine, opened the door, and stepped directly into the storm. The freezing rain soaked him in less than a second. His Italian shoes, polished to perfection, sank almost to his ankles in the thick, foul-smelling mud. His designer suit, which cost thousands of naira, became soaked and clung to his skin, losing all its form and its false armor. The cold wind lashed him mercilessly, but Kunle did not stop. He walked with difficulty, slipping and stumbling, feeling the mud splash his face and stain his hands. With each step in that mire, his pride crumbled a little more. He was walking the same path Emeka walked every day at dawn to clean the dirt from his crystal house. He was feeling firsthand the vulnerability and hardship of the real world, the world he thought he governed from his 40th floor office. He reached the end of the alley. In front of him was a precarious structure, a wooden door rotten at the base, protected by a small tin overhang that dripped incessantly. There was no doorbell, no security cameras, just the crudeness of extreme poverty. Kunle raised his fist, trembling with cold and pure terror. Terror that she wouldn't be there. Terror that she wouldn't forgive him. He knocked on the wet wood 3 times. The silence from inside was absolute. Kunle knocked again, harder this time, feeling his heart about to burst. "Emeka," he cried, his voice choked by the deafening sound of the rain hitting the tin roof. "Please, Emeka, open the door." He heard the faint sound of a rusted bolt turning. The door opened a few centimeters, just enough to reveal a pale, terrified face. It was Emeka. She wore a worn sweatshirt and gray joggers. Her right hand was wrapped in a makeshift, blood-stained bandage, the wound she had sustained, falling on the broken glass in the dining room. Behind her legs peered the frightened faces of 2 small children, her younger siblings, who looked at the soaked giant stranger with wide eyes. Upon recognizing the man outside, Emeka's face transformed into a mask of absolute panic. She instinctively took a step back and tried to close the door, convinced that the millionaire had fulfilled his threat and had come with the police to seize her. No, please, wait," Kunle pleaded, stopping the door with both hands, staining the wood with the mud from his palms. He didn't use force. His touch was desperate, almost weak. Emeka trembled like a leaf. Tears began to well up in her eyes, mixing with despair. "Mr. Adebayo, I beg you, for God's sake, don't report me. Emeka cried, hugging her younger siblings, using her own body as a shield. We're already packing. They're kicking us out tomorrow. I've already lost my job. I have nothing left to take. Please leave us in peace. The young woman's words were the final blow to Kunle's soul. Seeing the pure terror he himself had sown in that girl, seeing the bleeding wound on her hand, seeing the misery of the room behind her, definitively broke him. The giant of finance, the man who bowed to no one, lost strength in his legs. The mud splashed loudly as Kunle Adebayo's knees impacted violently against the soaked ground. Emeka let out a choked cry of surprise, covering her mouth with her good hand. The children's eyes widened. The richest man they had ever seen was kneeling in the rotting mud in front of their humble house under the storm, crying like a lost child. Kunle plunged his hands into the mud, lowered his head until his forehead almost touched the dirty water of the alley. It was total surrender, the most absolute and beautiful humiliation of his life. Forgive me. Kunle's voice came out as a broken moan, an animal sound laden with deep agony that chilled Emeka's blood. I beg you, Emeka. I beg you on my knees. Forgive me for being a monster. Forgive me for my arrogance, for my blindness, for hurting you. Emeka couldn't utter a word. She was paralyzed. Never, in her entire life, had she seen a man of that level of power humble himself in such a way. With mud-stained hands, trembling violently, Kunle pulled from beneath his soaked jacket the object he had protected with his own body throughout the journey. He extended the blue exercise book to Emeka, looking up at her. His face was unrecognizable, soaked in rain and tears, with red, pleading eyes. I read it. I read everything, Kunle sobbed, clutching the exercise book as if it were his only lifeline. You were right in every word. There was no longer anger in him, no longer ego, only a pain so immense and a sincerity so brutal that they completely disarmed the young woman's fear. The doctors almost sedated her this morning, Kunle continued, his voice choked, water sliding through his hair and falling onto his defeated shoulders. She wouldn't stop screaming. She was terrified. She only asked for you. She asked for Yejide to come back. I threw them all out. I ran them out of my house, but I don't know how to help her. I don't know how to love her like you do. The house is empty. She's fading, Emeka. She's giving up. Kunle lowered his hands, letting the exercise book fall into the mud, and clasped his palms in front of his chest in a gesture of absolute plea. I don't come to give you orders. I am not your boss. I am a failed son who comes to beg you for his mother's life. Kunle cried, not caring who saw him, not caring about the rain or the dirt. I offer you whatever you want. My money, my house, my entire life. Bring your siblings. Live with us. You'll never lack food again. But please, please, Emeka, I beg you by the soul of my dead sister. Come back to my house. Come back to my mother. Help me save her. Teach me to be the son she deserves. Don't leave me alone. The rain continued to fall relentlessly. The silence that settled between them was only interrupted by Kunle's choked sobs. Emeka looked at that powerful man broken in the mud. She remembered Mama Yetunde's face lighting up with a slice of pizza. She remembered the promise she had made not to leave her alone. Her heart, which knew no resentment, only infinite compassion, softened. Emeka took a step forward, ignoring the rain, knelt in front of Kunle, and with her bandaged hand, gently touched his soaked shoulder. Get up, mister. Kunle, Emeka said in a soft, sweet voice, full of a forgiveness he didn't believe he deserved. Let's go home. Mama Yetunde is waiting for us to have lunch. The slice of redemption. Sunday dawned with a clean, bright, and clear sky. The brutal storm that had lashed Lagos the previous afternoon and night had disappeared, leaving behind fresh air and vibrant light that filtered victoriously through the immense glass windows of the Adebayo mansion. The sterile, cold, and silent atmosphere that had dominated the residence for years had completely vanished. There was no longer the smell of hospital disinfectant, nor nurses in white uniforms patrolling the corridors with stern faces. There were no stainless steel trays or pre-filled syringes with sedatives. Instead, the air of the immense house was permeated with a glorious, warm, and deeply familiar aroma. The aroma of freshly baked dough, seasoned tomato sauce, oregano, and plenty of melted cheese. In the main bedroom, Mama Yetunde slowly opened her eyes. She had slept deeply, without nightmares or startled awakenings. At first, the usual Alzheimer's confusion tried to cloud her mind, but then she heard a sound that dispelled the shadows. It was the soft humming of a female voice, an old, sweet melody. Turning her head on the pillow, Yetunde saw Emeka. The young caregiver wore her impeccable light blue uniform with white trim, and her black hair was gathered in a perfect bun. Emeka was folding blankets near the window, bathed in sunlight. Yetunde blinked, feeling an immense warmth fill her chest, a trembling smile appearing on her wrinkled lips. "Yejid, you didn't leave," the elderly woman whispered, her eyes shining with tears of pure joy. Emeka left the blankets, approached the bed with a radiant smile, and gently took her hands. "I promised I'd never leave you alone, Mama," Emeka replied, kissing Yetunde's forehead with absolute devotion. "And I have a surprise for you. It's Sunday pizza day. Get up, put on your favorite yellow Ankara blouse, because today we're not eating in the room. Today we're eating at the big table." Half an hour later, the grand, solid oak dining room was the scene of the most beautiful miracle that house had ever witnessed. Natural light, warm and golden, flooded the room, creating an atmosphere of undeniable happiness and care. The scene seemed taken from a perfect photorealistic painting. In the foreground, sitting at the head of the wooden table, was Mama Yetunde. Emeka had carefully combed her grey hair, and the elderly woman wore her beautiful, soft, luminous yellow Ankara blouse. She wore her glasses adjusted, and for the first time in half a decade, her posture was not that of a defeated patient, but that of a fulfilled woman. She was smiling with such genuine, immense happiness that her eyes crinkled behind her lenses. Beside her, leaning with a protective warmth that radiated love in every movement, was Emeka. With an expert and careful hand, the young nurse with a giant heart was using a spatula to serve a huge, succulent slice of pepperoni pizza. The melted mozzarella cheese, golden at the edges, stretched in perfect, elastic, steaming strings from the edge of the cardboard box to Yetunde's fine porcelain plate. On the table, there were no pillboxes or green purees. There were 2 gigantic pizzas, one of them half-cut, crystal glasses overflowing with fresh water, and paper serviettes. It was a simple banquet, overflowing with fat, calories, and sodium, but infinitely more healing than all the therapies of the most expensive neurologists in the city. However, the most monumental and astonishing change in that photorealistic scene was not in the food or the elderly woman's smile. It was in the background of the room. In the doorway connecting the dining room to the hallway, there was no longer the dark-suited businessman, briefcase in hand, hidden in the shadows, observing with wide eyes and an open mouth from shock. That specter of the past had disappeared forever. Kunle Adebayo was no longer a spectator in the shadows of his own life. The millionaire was there in full sunlight. He had discarded his designer jacket, torn off his silk tie, and had the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up to his elbows. And for the first time in 20 years, Kunle was sitting at the table. He was sitting right next to his mother, holding his own slice of pizza in his hand. His eyes, though still bearing the shadow of the previous night's tears, shone with an overwhelming peace. He observed Yetunde with absolute devotion, admiring every wrinkle on her smiling face, as if it were the greatest treasure in the universe. Emeka finished serving the portion of stretchy cheese onto Yetunde's plate and winked at Kunle. The businessman returned a smile filled with eternal gratitude. In the garden behind, the childish laughter of Emeka's 2 younger siblings could be heard, running across the lawn, chasing butterflies, filling the mansion with a life that money could never buy. Mama Yetunde took the slice of pizza with both hands. The cheese stained her fingers, but no one cared. She took a big bite and closed her eyes, letting out a sigh of infinite pleasure that made the hearts of those present vibrate. Opening her eyes, Yetunde turned her head and looked directly at Kunle. The fog of Alzheimer's would always be there, lurking, stealing names and dates, confusing pasts and presents. But love Emeka had taught Kunle to demonstrate that love was invulnerable to illness. Yetunde looked at the handsome man in the white shirt, sitting beside her. Perhaps in that precise millisecond, she didn't remember exactly that he owned a financial empire. Perhaps she didn't remember his exact age or his university degrees, but Yetunde smiled, extended her cheese-stained hand, and caressed Kunle's cheek with infinite tenderness. "It's delicious, my mischievous boy," Yetunde whispered, her eyes full of light. "Eat slowly, Kunle. There's enough for everyone." Kunle felt the whole world stop. The air left his lungs, and a tear of pure, hot, healing happiness slid down his face to his mother's hand. She had called him by his name. After so many years of darkness, she had recognized him, not because of the doctors, not because of the pills, but because for the first time, he was truly there. "Yes, Mama," Kunle replied, his voice trembling with emotion, taking a bite of his pizza, savoring the best moment of his entire existence. "There's enough for everyone. I love you, Mama. I love you very much." In that light-filled dining room, Between the aroma of melted cheese and the laughter of a recovered mother, the businessman understood that he had been the poorest man in the world until the night he knelt in the mud. Because in the end, true wealth is not kept in bulletproof crystal safes, but in the ability to sit at the table, share bread, and remember, before time runs out, how to love those who gave us life.